Earlier this year, I was in a bit of a conundrum as to which was my favourite lens for hiking when I was using 35mm film cameras. So, on a hike up into the hills of Wales, I asked you the question and wanted to know if you thought you knew of any good lenses which would suit my purposes better than the one I'd been using for a few years. Now, the lens a number of you came up with was the Tamron 28-300 vibration control lens in a Nikon AI fit. Now 28-300 offers a lot of flexibility. I mean, this lens will go from a pretty wide 28mm to 300, which is a pretty good telephoto, more than enough for my purposes. But one of the things I wanted to know before I actually decided to standardise on this lens is, would it suit my hiking purposes? Now, after about 9 or 10 months of use, I am reasonably happy that this is the lens I will take on most of my walks into the mountains. But it's not perfect by any means, and this isn't a review so much of the lens as a discussion of how I find it in my particular use case, which is obviously on 35mm film bodies, typically using a HP5 Plus or a Delta 400, a reasonable speed film, and what I like and dislike about this lens. Now, prior to moving to this lens, I was using another Tamron. This is a 28-200. And this is a much smaller lens. It's much smaller and lighter, but it's got a shorter zoom range. And more importantly, it's got no vibration reduction. Now, because it's quite a slow lens, it's f5.6 at the long end. When I start to get into dull conditions, as you've seen on, I'm sure, many of my videos, I suffer with camera shake, or I have to ramp the film speed up excessively, or I have to underexpose. None of those things are particularly desirable with negative films. It just gets very, very coarse and grainy with no detail in the shadows. So one of the things I was hoping to get from the vibration control was about 3 extra stops. Now that's typically what I've found, or in some circumstances I've been amazed. I have shot down to half a second with the thing sort of racked out to 100mm. Now that makes it, for me, usable in all light conditions with a 400 speed film, which is very important. So to sum up the things I like about the lens, vibration control, number one. That is absolutely the priority for me with a lens like this. Number two, however, is the image quality. Now, I have found the image quality to be very good. I mean, I'm not going to start pixel peeping or doing side-by-side comparison shots at the same aperture tripod mounted as I am with the smaller and cheaper non-stabilized zoom, but to my eye, it's sharper. I noticed straight away when I started using this lens that it was a pretty sharp optic, both at the wide end and the long end. I've got no problems racking it out to 300. I mean, I'm sure the optical quality drops off, but don't forget, I'm shooting 400 speed black and white film here. We're not talking about 50 megapixel digital. Second thing, I'm surprised by how much that extra 100mm of zoom range gives me. I mean, it might not sound too much, 200, 300mm when you're shooting landscapes, but when you're trying to compress those perspectives or cut out the unnecessary details on those long mountain shots, then it makes a huge difference to me. And I find myself now thinking that 200mm is a little bit too short. The third and final thing is filter size. Now, filter size is only 67mm. That's pretty compact for such a wide-ranging zoom. The Nikon equivalents are up in the sort of 77mm, and they also weigh about a third more. So they become a bit unwieldy with hoods and with purchasing filters, etc. If I wanted to use graduates, my Coke-in-P system will fit with no trouble at all. So that keeps the whole package very affordable. Now, there are one or two things I don't like about this lens, and first and foremost is it does suffer from zoom creep. I think you can see there, it's not a great example, but this thing hangs down from my Peak Designs clip, and when you're walking along up and down the hill, gradually, it's making a liar of me, there it goes, gradually the thing just drops down and it bangs against your backpack. Now, I thought this might be the particular sample I've got. Well, it isn't actually. I bought another one of these to have as a backup, and that's identical. Now, it's not a problem in normal use if you're just walking around at moderate angles, but because I use a Peak Designs clip on my bag, it is a problem. So every time I've taken a shot, I have to remember to click the little lever back into position to stop it moving. Now, it's a good job it's actually got that zoom lock, because that does mean it'll stay in place. But every time I go to take a shot, I have to remember to unlock it, and then I can zoom it back in and out again and relock it. That's a bit of a pain. The old Tamron, it did have a little lock on it. It didn't need it. They don't budge. I've got 2 of these. They're rock solid. It's just a bit quicker and easier to use. Not a showstopper, but it's nicer. Now, the second thing might sound like a bit of a strange one. I'm going to complain about the size and weight. Now, This isn't a particularly heavy lens. I'll put the stats up on the screen with its smaller counterpart. But I like to use it on a very light Nikon F80 or a Nikon F80 or a Nikon F80 depending on where you live. And the problem with it is it becomes a little bit front heavy. This body is very light. It's very compact. The lens weighs, a little bit more than the body, I think. And again, on the clip, on the Peak Designs clip, you can feel it at the end of the day. And it might sound like I'm nitpicking, but a few hundred grams in this position all day does actually add up. Now, I would say that I actually think that the camera body which best suits this is the Nikon F100. Now, that's a much beefier body. Already when I'm holding this camera now and this lens combination, it feels well balanced. Feels like the two are made for each other. When you zoom the thing out, it doesn't feel like it's going to tip forward if it was on a tripod. It's a nice solid package, but that would add another 400-500 grams to the overall weight if I was carrying it on my clip. So it's not the ideal hiking outfit. However, that is a very, very nice feel to a camera setup. That's probably the best balanced lens I've got for the Nikon F100. Now, the third and final thing I'm going to complain about is the feel. Now, I wouldn't say it feels any worse particularly, maybe slightly worse than the equivalent Nikon lenses like the 24-85 or the 70-300. But in common with all these lenses these days, it's not got a really quality feel to it. It doesn't make me want to go out and shoot with it. It's a tool to do a job. It's the same with this one, to be honest. This is, again, workmanlike, does the job, it gets things done. But it's not a pleasure to shoot with. It's nothing like shooting with the old manual focus lenses or even a high quality prime autofocus. It just feels a little bit soulless really. But then again, it does get the job done, so possibly I am nitpicking. So overall, what's my verdict on this Tamron 28-300 VC? Well, my verdict is it is the right lens for the job. And thank you very much for those people who recommended it and all the other people who recommended similar lenses to try out. I did consider or read up reviews of them before purchasing this. It's just that this fits my existing Nikon bodies. I don't have to spend any more money. It's fully compatible with the Nikon. The vibration control works very, very well indeed. It means now I can shoot with a filter on all the time and rate the film at something like 250, the 400 speed films for more shadow detail. Still get it hand-holdable. I have used it at ridiculously slow speeds, a little bit hit and miss when you get down to half a second, but you can't really complain about that. So it's a winner, and it's definitely going to be my main hiking camera. Would I use it for other things? Probably not. You may have seen a video recently where I shot in Liverpool and I just didn't like it, so no. It's not the lens for everything. But overall, I'm very, very pleased with it, and yes, hopefully you'll be seeing more of it on upcoming trips. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.